So you've made a mistake. Maybe it's small, like a spelling mistake in a journal entry, or maybe it's a bit bigger, like writing the wrong month on your cover page. Whatever the size of your mistake though, I've got a fix for you. Starting with probably the most obvious of fixes, you can of course use correction tape or correction fluid. My personal preference is for correction tape, and this one works fairly well on white paper, though it's good to be mindful that it can change the color of your pen when you go over the top of it, usually making it a little bit lighter or a little bit less saturated. It also usually is only good for white paper. Even using it on cream colored paper means that it'll still be kind of noticeable, and using it on craft paper or blackout paper, it will be very noticeable. As said, you can also use correction fluid, which works in pretty much exactly the same way as correction tape. This one will also give you very good coverage of your mistake, but it can be a little bit harder to write over it. You do want to make sure that it is super dry before you try and do that. Another issue with a correction fluid pen is that sometimes the fluid can pool up and be a little bit hard to control, so a similar but slightly easier fix is using a white gel pen instead. This one is great for smaller mistakes. I often use this one for spelling mistakes in my bullet journal entries, and typically what I'll do is I'll just write over the top of the spelling mistake with the correct word, and then just use the white gel pen over the top of the parts of the mistake that are still visible. This means I don't have to use quite as much of the white gel pen, and it also means that I don't have to try and write over the top of it, which can still be a little bit tricky. Depending on what type of mistake you're trying to cover with your white gel pen, you might need to go over it a couple of times, especially on water-based pens like Tombows, because the gel pen can actually pick up the ink from the mistake and make itself a little bit less white. If a gel pen isn't really for you, then another option is using a paint pen. These ones again will give you really good coverage, especially if you're using quite an opaque pen, but it can also have the imprecision issue if you're using a paint pen that has quite a thick tip. If you're going for smaller mistakes, you're going to want a thin-tipped pen. One of the issues that our pen-related fixes run into is opacity, and making sure that whatever you're using to fix the mistake is opaque enough that you don't see the mistake through that fix. A great option for this then is to use a black pen to fix the mistake. So effectively taking the mistake, blacking it out, and then you can write over the top of that with a gel or paint pen. This is really good for headers that you might have misspelled, or maybe the lettering hasn't turned out the way you wanted it to. And you can also kind of use this as the black paper version of correction tape. So if you make a mistake on a blackout journal, just going over the top of it with a black pen. Of course, this might not necessarily be what you want for the layout, so it won't work in all situations. Sometimes when we're drawing things into our journal, our lines can get a little bit wonky. One of the ways that we can hide a wonky line is effectively just by adding more lines to it, so making it kind of a little bit sketchy or a little bit scribbly. This makes the mistake look intentional and thus it hides it. If making it more sketchy isn't an ideal option, you can always just thicken your lines in general. So going back over with a thicker pen, or just carefully thickening the original line with the pen that you're already using. Another fix for when your lines go a little bit off kilter is to add a drop shadow to whatever you're putting in your journal. I've used this myself previously when I overestimated my ability to draw circles. In those cases, I just went over the top with a much better looking circle and turned the initial wonky line into a drop shadow. If you aren't so great at doing drop shadows, especially drop shadow lettering, it can be helpful to look up reference images on Google. Another great way to cover your mistakes is just by sticking something over the top. And of course, if we're talking about sticking, a great option is stickers. This can be a fun way to add decoration to cover your mistake. And a great example of this is from my first journal where I accidentally dropped some kind of cheese flavored snack, like a Cheeto or a Cheezle or something, and it stained my page, so I simply covered that with a little flower sticker. Another stick over the mistake option is using washi tape, though do be mindful that some washies are minimally see-through, so you might want to go over the mistake with a white pen or correction tape first. This type of mistake also helps if you're already using washi tape as part of your layout, so it doesn't look out of place. This may not look like a mistake initially, but I was goal setting on autopilot, and I've actually already completely set up this goal, and this is supposed to be for a different goal, so I need a way to either fix or cover this area. So what I'm going to do is stick some dot grid paper that's the same as the paper of my notebook over this section. One possibility for this is just turning to later in your notebook and using some dot grid paper from the back of the notebook, or what I like to do is keep all of my offcuts from making Dutch doors. We're just going to take a piece out of the back, and we can use this to completely cover up my mistake. When doing this trick, I do try and make sure that I perfectly line up the dot grid of the new piece with the dot grid already on the paper, just so that it blends in a little more seamlessly. To adhere this to the page though, I'd typically just use double-sided tape like I am here. It is still a little bit noticeable here, but I find that once I fill the page with writing, I'll hardly notice it. While using the paper from your journal is a very good fix, because the paper blends in really nicely with the paper that you've got, it does also have some issues. One being that cutting out smaller pieces of paper for those really little mistakes can be a little bit fiddly, and then getting glue onto the back of them can be even worse. But also over time, because this paper is the same thickness as your journal paper, you do start adding a fair bit of bulk to your notebook. Especially if, like me, you enjoy using 160 GSM paper, which is a fair bit thicker. A really good alternative that I found for this is using white sticker labels instead of your dot grid paper. Not only are these thinner and already have adhesive on the back of them, but they also come in quite long rolls for relatively cheap, so lots of opportunities to fix our mistakes. This is great for smaller and medium-sized mistakes because you can cut down the sticker to fit over the mistake area. Here I'm just using a craft knife to cut the sticker to fit exactly over the mistake area. Vogel accidentally wrote his meal plan on the wrong week. But you can also just use scissors to pre-cut the sticker areas out and then stick them over the mistakes on the page. Of course, with this fix, because we're not using paper from your notebook, it means you do have to be mindful of color matching. Thankfully, the pages of this notebook are bright white, just like the stickers, so they blend in really well. We do, of course, have other options for things that we can stick over the top of mistakes. For example, we could use wrapping paper, scrapbook paper, decorative papers. You do need to use an adhesive on these, but they're a great way to fill a whole page if necessary. Do be mindful though, depending on the type of paper you're using, you can end up adding a fair bit of bulk to your journal if you're doing this repeatedly. That's why something like wrapping paper can be really useful because it is much thinner than scrapbooking paper. Post-it notes and sticky notes are also great for covering mistakes because they already have a sticky edge. These also come in a wide range of styles, so depending on the style you get, you could also just incorporate these into your journal for decoration. Ephemera is another good way to both cover mistakes and add decoration, and depending on the type of the ephemera, there's usually a good range of mistake sizes that you can cover. One example of this is coloring book sheets, and you can see I stuck this on my cover page here to hide a mistake that I made when I tried to draw it in myself. Another great stick over the mistake option is using printables. All you have to do is print them off, cut them out, and then stick them in over your mistake. This could be something like functional printables, like the trackers that I offer in my shop, or they could be decorative ones to add to your journal theme. Sometimes we stuff up so bad though that we just have to sacrifice the page as a whole. One of the fixes that we can do in this instance is taking the page and turning it into something else. So for example, if you've stuffed up the boxes on a weekly spread that you're trying to make, maybe you could turn it into a general memories page. If the layout of a tracker doesn't quite work for what you wanted to use it for originally, is there a different type of tracker that you could turn it into? If you just don't want the page there at all, then we can of course remove the page. If there's nothing on the back of the page that you've made the mistake on, you can cut the page out. I recommend that you cut just a little bit further out than the spine edge of the page, and then stick down any of the excess with either washi or double-sided tape. This just means you're less likely to have other pages of your notebook accidentally fall out. If doing that kind of surgery on your journal makes you a little nervous though, you can of course stick the pages together. One of the options for this is just to use double-sided tape, and I'd recommend putting the tape close to the edges of the page so that you avoid trying to open them back up when you use your journal in future. Double-sided tape is more of a permanent fix, so what you can do is use washi tape to stick the page together instead. This one just involves putting washi tape down the edge of the previous page and then folding that over to the next spread. And the nice part about this one is that it's reversible. You can also use this for layouts that don't necessarily have mistakes, but might have information that you don't want people to see if your journal's kind of lying around. For instance, it could be personal journaling or maybe gift ideas, anything you want to keep more hidden. One of my favorite ways to deal with mistakes though is to kind of not deal with it. One of the options here is just ignoring the mistake. Often I opt in for that when I make spelling errors in my layouts, or rather spelling errors that aren't in the headers. Though sometimes I'll make a spelling error in the header and still choose to ignore it. Another option here is to fully embrace the mistake. So this is good for instances where maybe a page design has been embellished accidentally, either by you, for instance when I dropped my pen on the page, or maybe by somebody else. Shout out to all of the toddlers who want to help their adults do journaling. Another option which can be a fun one is to make fun of the mistake. This is something that I'll do typically when I want to have the correct information there, but I also couldn't necessarily be bothered to fix the mistake. A good example of this is when I accidentally wrote Monday first instead of Wednesday first, but thankfully this was in April, so haha, April Fools. But I was still not very impressed. Having these mistake fixes in your back pocket can help you tackle your journaling with less fear of messing up. But what if you want to avoid mistakes to start with? In that case, our previous video is worth checking out. But one of the biggest mistakes when it comes to bullet journaling actually can't be fixed with the tips we've talked about in this video. That's because it's related to consistency. If that's something you struggle with, then the video at the bottom is for you. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.